Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this uh, cooperative governance class. My name is Zoe Creighton. I'm the co-executive director of the BC Cooperative Association, and I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Sinai, the Tanaha, and the Syilx nations in what is now known as Nelson, British Columbia. And I'm very happy to be here today. I'm so grateful to have been invited by the Women's Economic Council to collaborate on this accelerating inclusion training in support of the 50-30 Challenge on behalf of the BC Co-op Association. And as I said, this session today is on cooperative governance. For those of you who have participated in some of the other master classes, this content will stem from that and build upon that, but I've designed it so it's also pretty much a standalone class. So welcome. A little bit about the BC Co-op Association. We are known by ourselves and externally as the Knowledge and Resource Center of British Columbia, and we do a number of activities and have a number of programs that are partly focused on our 100+ credit union co-op members, but also on the greater public. And what we do is focus upon co-op education, like what we're doing here today, on co-op development, which involves the supporting of emerging and existing co-ops and credit unions to really do the best work that they can within the context of the co-op model. We have support services for our members specifically, and we do some government relations work in the form of advocacy and lobbying to make efforts to create a more accommodating and supportive environment in BC for the development and the thriving of co-ops. And the last thing we do, I mean, not the last, but the last one I'll talk about is that we really act as a coordinator and a convener for co-ops across the province by hosting online and in-person events and facilitating opportunities to allow co-ops to enact the old Principle 6, the cooperation or collaboration among cooperatives. So today, what we'll cover in the co-op governance world is the ultimate goal of this masterclass is to increase understanding of the unique structure and attributes of co-ops and their governance to enhance your role and opportunities as a woman or non-binary co-op leader. And the basic things we'll touch on is we'll explore what governance is, who is involved in governance in the co-op, the tools of governance, why co-op governance itself is unique and why it's distinct from other forms of corporate governance, the hallmarks of effective co-op governance, some ways it can be strong, that the governance structures and systems and tools can support your purpose and values as a co-op and not support them as effectively. And we'll touch on a little bit on board versus management roles, and then talk about the challenges and the pitfalls. And part of the reflective part of this session is to have you as a participant come up with your own ideas around how to mitigate or decrease the impacts of some of the pitfalls of any governance, but co-op governance in particular, and how to use the key attributes of co-ops to mitigate those pitfalls. So, what is governance? when we're doing these sessions live, I always ask folks to come up with a definition. So maybe in your brains, or you can scribble it down on a piece of paper or draw a picture of it to think about what governance means to you. And there are also some specific definitions that apply to the co-op model. The root of the word is from the Greek or the Latin. Gouvernare is Latin, and I think gubernao is the way you pronounce it in Greek. My ancient Greek is not too strong. But those words both stem from the concept of steering or navigating. So governance is around the steering, the navigating of the associative aspects of co-ops that you're involved in. Governance can also be defined as the systems, processes, and tools concerned with ensuring the overall direction, oversight, and accountability of an organization, or the processes for making and implementing decisions. I've also heard in presentations like this, in efforts to really simplify what governance is, it's who decides what, and everything stems from there. Who makes decisions? Why? What are the tools that support them? What are the frameworks that support effective decision-making and role clarity among co-ops? And why is co-op governance unique? There are three, well, I kind of snuck an extra one in, but there are three key elements that distinguish co-op governance from every other kind of governance. The central role of the member. Members are at the core of every decision that's made in a cooperative. If there's ever a tricky decision, in addition to looking at the mission and vision of the co-op, the people who are making the decisions need to think about how this decision will impact its members, and always think about it from the perspective of betterment of the membership in general. The second unique attribute is that co-ops adhere to internationally recognized principles and values, which we'll bring up later in the presentation. And for those of you who have looked at the Co-ops 101 masterclass in this series, you will have understood that there is a codified set of internationally agreed upon principles and values. And in order to make effective decisions in co-ops, the decision makers need to refer to those specific principles and values. And the third piece is that each co-op features a unique set of relationships as defined by the co-op structure. So the members and the board of directors have a unique relationship. The board with staff and the staff with members, they all have unique relationships within the co-op structure that need to be tended to. And then the last one I tucked in there is this concept of Principle 6, which is that each co-op is nested in a system of local supports, peer supports, and then also in a provincial in Canada, a national and an international system of supports. And all of these supports are hardwired to bring about the success of all co-ops, wherever they are in the country. So if we look at the co-op structure, which has also been introduced in previous classes, this really demonstrates the groups or the roles that are included in the governance of a co-op. So the members provide the circle that envelops, encases, supports the entire co-op. And you can see by the arrows that staff communicate closely with members by providing them services or goods. And the members also elect the board of directors. So there's this whole circular, there are many ways of visually expressing this, but the members elect the board of directors, who then hire the ED or the CEO, or if in a smaller co-op, just the management or one single staff or coordinator. And then if there's more staff, they in turn hire those staff and support those staff who are responsible to the members, who then the directors. In a worker co-op, it's slightly different because sometimes all of the members are also on the board and all of the members are worker members, and they might have a flat structure in that way. But in non-worker co-ops, these are the roles that are included in governance structures. So in order to facilitate effective decision-making in a co-op, there are a number of tools that need to be closely attended to. Some of them co-op members themselves don't directly influence, but they still affect how they interact with their co-op and how decisions are made. So on top in British Columbia, anyway, it's called the BC Cooperative Associations Act. And that is not easily changed by members of co-ops, but associations like the BC Co-op Association can act on behalf of our members and our members' members in order to affect that kind of societal change that will influence change in legislation and regulations. That legislation is informed by legal regulations, or that legislation informs legal regulations, which include the two principal documents that all co-ops need to develop in order to incorporate as a co-op. And in BC, again, they're called the Memorandum of Association and the Rules of Association. And both of these documents should be the result of thoughtful and deliberate conversations that happen among founding members of a cooperative. They contemplate things like how many directors should be on the board, the kind of decisions the directors are responsible for making, and what the directors might delegate to staff or to a general manager or a CEO. They contemplate restrictions on any business that the co-op might not want to get into, and all sorts of other kind of fundamental, foundational decisions. So those are filed with the province, and those are the documents to which you, as a member and a director of a co-op, are legally bound. Internally, some of the governance tools, and this is kind of a playground or a framework, if you want to be more formal about it, that co-op members and directors and staff and the general manager or the CEO really have some influence on how to codify the values and really guide both operations and decision making, and basically how the co-op it's as an entity supports the humans, the people part of the co-op to bring the best services or goods to their members and support the growth of that co-op. So internal policies can include everything from the higher level governance ones around confidentiality and conflict of interest, and all the financial policies around financial oversight and transparency. But internal governance tools also include clarity around role definition. So, job descriptions or role descriptions, reporting frameworks, accountability policies. So, in the event and with people, it's inevitable that conflicts arise. Some of the policies that support decision making and accountability in co-ops center around this accountability. Who reports to whom? Who has the authority to make decisions on behalf of whom? There are also policies that are governance tools that are around a code of conduct, how you can hold a member, staff member or another member responsible for how they interact with other members or the public, is usually contemplated in a code of conduct. And then there are group agreements, how we work together, how we demonstrate respect for one another in our co-op, distribution of responsibilities. Another big one is the organizational structure. What are the committees? What are the terms of reference of the committees? So all of these words, you may use them a lot in your day-to-day work, or this might be the first time that you've heard about them. But all of these elements are tools of governance, and tending to them is what makes the difference between effective governance and kind of sloppy, ineffective governance, where decisions aren't as strong as they could be, where people don't feel like they are motivated to be part of an organization that really supports them to participate in the way that they want to participate. And that ends up, not providing adequate goods and services to the members or the general public, because that backdrop is kind of lacking. So these tools of governance are really important, and they're kind of at the core of what both differentiates co-ops from one another, but also what differentiates co-op enterprises and community service co-ops from other nonprofit societies or other enterprise models. So just acknowledging that you might have already heard of these. I touched on it at the beginning of this presentation, but the 7 internationally recognized co-op principles, if you're ever going to become very involved in a co-op, you should, a lot of us don't know them off by heart in order, but you should at least familiarize yourself with what each and every one of them means. And it's outside the scope of this governance session to go into them more deeply. You can look at the Co-ops 101 session that is part of this Accelerating Inclusion series that was put together by my colleague Madeline Reed at the BC Co-op Association. But in general, just remember that you can look online and find out what these all each actually need. But at the core of them is participation and democracy, and as well as kind of the other core ones that are around education, and the principle 6 that I've mentioned a couple of times: cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community, which is kind of co-ops have been known as the original social enterprise. They're hardwired to care not only about their members, but also the ecology and social systems in which the co-op operates. So they're at their very core socially responsible organizations that are predicated on solidarity and care for community. The values as well, just touch on these: self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equity and equality, solidarity, cooperative values, The cooperative values is at the center of that, because those are the 6 cooperative values, and your co-op itself can definitely build on some other values that are important to your founding members, and you can revise them as the co-op evolves, as the environment in which you operate evolves. But these 6 ones are at the core. And once again, they can be used if they stay alive in your co-op, they can be used really effectively to guide decisions to be made. And they're internationally agreed upon. So like many values, everyone has their own interpretation, but they're also a good point of discussion. They're a good opportunity to there is a good opportunity to explore them more if you're on a board and interested in having some generative discussion built into some of your board meetings. You can pull each of these out at a different meeting and have conversations around how each one in particular is reflected in your actions as a director, or collectively as how you manifest them within the everything that you do in the co-op or outside of the co-op on behalf of the co-op. So at this point, it's a good opportunity to kind of pause and reflect. I've introduced a bunch of different concepts, and if you look at your handout that's associated with this co-op governance session, these questions are written down. But it'd be a good idea at this point to pause the video to take 15 or so minutes to reflect upon what has been introduced so far, and to integrate that into some kind of practical learning. I've come up with 2 questions that you can scribble down on a piece of paper or otherwise record. And the first one is looking again at the cooperative values and principles. So if you can reflect on what role these values and principles might play in co-op governance, i.e. knowing what governance is, knowing what makes co-op governance unique, and seeing the principles and values. What role might these principles and values play in the way decisions are made, in the definition of roles and responsibilities, in the development of policy, in the founding documents created by the founding board? So that's the first question. And then the second one is, how might these tools be developed to cultivate and retain diversity and inclusion in your co-op or in your organization? So how can these policies, the reporting frameworks, the charters, the communications guidelines, the establishment of a vision and a mission for the co-op, how can they be developed to cultivate and retain diversity and inclusion in your co-op? So just pause the video for a bit, and then we can resume. Welcome back. So now we can look at kind of what the North Star is for effective, or the North Stars are. I don't think there are 4 of them, but there's those kind of guiding lights of effective co-op governance, and there are a bunch of them, but I've kind of distilled them down to these 4 key ones: participation, transparency, accountability, and equitable practice. So I invite you to think about how you can apply each of those concepts into what you're already learning about co-op governance, but I'll provide my perspectives. Participation around decision making in governance and inclusion of perspectives by everyone who is impacted by those decisions is key in effective co-op governance. So participation in decisions by members, in decisions that impact them. And that might be, if it's a bricks and mortar co-op, around location, to ensure that the location is accessible by transit or affordable means by the majority of the members. Participation, if it's, an office, make sure everyone can access it, right? Make those decisions on behalf of your members if you're the board of directors, or actively solicit member input in order to make those kinds of decisions. Transparency is a key. Well, it is a hallmark. I'm not going to try to think of a better word just to think of a better word. The difference between transparent and non-transparent governance can be that between success and the demise of a co-op. If conversations are not documented, decisions are not documented, and the rationale for decisions that affect members and staff and the co-op are not clearly communicated to the people who they affect. If members don't have access to the financial status of the co-op and are kind of kept in the dark around whether the co-op is financially challenged, and they don't have an opportunity to be able to support in the financial growth or stability of a co-op. All that kind of transparency that in other corporate models is not as centered in their governance is really essential to center in co-op governance, because of the values and the innate democratic principles of the organizations. Accountability is also a key cornerstone of effective co-op governance. Understanding the roles and responsibilities, reporting, communication relationships, decision-making relationships, and for members and staff and the board to be able to trace decisions back to the bodies or the people who were responsible for making them, who they needed to consult. A tool of governance can also be one of those RACI charts, the RACI charts, around who is responsible or just informed, and everything in between around decisions, who needs to be consulted, who needs to approve a decision. Those kinds of pieces all form the basis of good accountability practices for co-op governance. And the one at the bottom there, last but certainly not least, is around equitable practices. They need to be completely centered so that all folks who belong to a co-op have just the same opportunity to participate in the decisions that are appropriate for them as any other members. We could pause on those for a long time too, but I encourage you to keep these slides, and as you evolve your co-op, kind of touch base and see how these four concepts play out in your governance structures and tools, in your decision-making practices. And it's a good kind of cross-check to make sure you're on the right track. So Board roles, because a lot of people think governance is exclusively the domain of boards of directors. It isn't, but the board is often charged with oversight and ensuring that the tools are in place for effective governance. So often too, when the VCCA and some of our other co-op development co-op developer partners are supporting co-ops who are in conflict, it's often around a lack of understanding between the roles between management and the board, and in decision making, in overstep, in overreach. Sometimes the board dives too deeply into operations. Sometimes management doesn't provide enough information to the board for them to be able to have their oversight responsibilities effectively carried out. So the board, the board looks outward. The board looks to the future and outward. The board represents the members. At its core, the board is elected by the membership and needs to represent the members on all decisions that they make. Directors have as a group, have the authority to act. Individual directors have no authority on behalf of the co-op. It is only as the collective entity known as the board that the directors have a group to have the authority to act. And cohesion and consensus is important. So having creative controversy, so that around the board table and around board decisions, that's very important. But once a decision is made, the decision, whether it's by majority or by consensus or by consent, whatever decision-making model the board decides upon, once they have made that decision, they need to be cohesive around it. But to get to that decision, diversity of opinion and perspectives are so important to drive discussion. And it is that diversity, plurality of perspectives, of different lived experience, of different socioeconomic status, different cultural backgrounds, different roles within the co-op, as a supplier or a consumer or a worker. Having those diverse viewpoints in board discussions is a really essential element, both of effective governance, but also in allowing the board to have the role of decision making and leadership in these decisions really be the best it can be. So there are different types of boards, and they're really it's really a spectrum, and a lot of co-ops and all organizations get kind of stalled out sometimes trying to really define where their board is specifically on this spectrum. And some boards really need to know whether they're just an advisory board, very hands-off, or whether they need to roll up all their sleeves and do the operational work of the co-op. And that's usually when the co-op's very young. But in point of fact, it's quite often boards are on a spectrum, and it depends where they're at with the strength and expertise and immersion and like age in the co-op, how long the manager has been in the co-op, how long the CEO or ED or whatever has been involved in the co-op. The board kind of needs to be flexible enough to pulse in and out of these different places upon the spectrum, from operational working to advisory. And at the end of the day, it's really around, in my opinion anyway, people do really often benefit from knowing exactly what type of board they're on or what kind of governance they're involved in. But for me, I find it most useful to think of how engaged does the board need to be in the operations? Is it running smoothly enough and managed smoothly enough and has enough staff with enough skills and expertise and all that for the board to just be really concerned about outward and external and policy? Or do they need to, lean a little bit more towards supporting management to do some of the operations tasks? So how engaged should the board be is really a key question. Board responsibilities, there are many, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. But I'll just introduce kind of one of these pieces at a time, and maybe jot down or otherwise record whether or not you understand what each of these responsibilities can mean in your co-op. So oversee the financial matters of the cooperative. This includes the annual budget. This includes monitoring revenue and expenses. Board has to present the annual return back to the members at the annual meeting, or the annual return, the financial statements at the annual meeting. The board has to make recommendations on how to allocate surplus. So that's overseeing the financial matters. It doesn't mean doing the actual bookkeeping necessarily, but overseeing. Creating policies and procedures that pertain to the governance of the association. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, and it probably won't be the operations policies and procedures, but the governance ones are board responsibilities, like the conflict of interest, like the code of conduct for board members, like the restrictions on business, like how they make decisions, all of those kinds of policies. Confidentiality. They oversee and support the general manager. So often in the model where there's a general manager and staff, or a CEO or an executive director, or there are a bunch of different names. The board's only employee is the general manager, and they need to ensure that they support this ED general manager role as best they can. The board sets and monitors strategic vision, goals, and objectives. Usually this is done by an annual, biannual, triannual strategic plan, where again, they look externally and outward to develop goals and strategies that then staff and management will implement through tactics. Give the cooperative a voice. Quite often, the board is charged with being kind of the official external spokes group of the co-op, especially when the co-op doesn't have the capacity to have an outreach or marketing team. And then the last one is to engage members. And some boards can do this just through the annual general meeting. More effective boards usually are in touch with their members, because engaged members can inform the board on their strategic decisions around how they look outward and external to benefit the co-op, and be able to assess risks and opportunities over the long term for the co-op. The board's role in decision making. And this is fairly straightforward, but you've probably heard about fiduciary duties, the duties of loyalty and trust that board members have been bestowed upon them by their members, if that grammar is correct. But the key pieces in governance for boards is to ask strong questions that are grounded in equity and understanding of their membership, to protect the members' interests, and to evaluate and mitigate risks to the cooperative. So you can reflect upon that for a while, but it weaves back into the board responsibilities. So their responsibilities and then how the board members make decisions within these realms of responsibility. Ask, protect, and evaluate. So from the other end, member roles. Members keep informed so that their voices can be heard. Members support the co-op success through patronage. If it's a co-op that has goods or services, then the members should purchase the goods or services through the co-op to support the success of the co-op. You can volunteer through the co-op with the co-op, or just be an ambassador, be a champion, show up to meetings, show up to events. And then elect the directors with whom you find alignment to make decisions on your behalf. So that's one of the key responsibilities of members. If nothing else, elect the directors who can make decisions on your behalf. Tools for decision making, which is also a cornerstone of effective co-op governance. I've talked about the policies and the co-op rules and the memorandum of association. And some people who weren't part of the founding crew of a co-op shelve these and seldom look at them. But effective governance for co-ops really is predicated on these documents being alive, the policies being alive and being referred to, the rules being alive and being referred to, because they remove uncertainty, they guide complex decisions, they minimize risk, they assign accountability, and they allow for distribution of opportunities, power, and resources to meet the needs of all members. And that last piece is key, especially in the context of this training series, Accelerating Inclusion, allowing for the distribution of opportunities, power, and resources is really essential. So when we think of effective co-op governance, we've talked about some of the hallmarks, we've talked about some of the tools, we've talked about how to make strong decisions, how to make inclusive decisions, the importance of diversity around the board table and other groups who are responsible for their own decision makers among the groups. We have to look at some of the challenges and the pitfalls that happen in co-op governance, because there are themes, definitely. So this is just an example of some of the pitfalls and one of the activities, just to end this class, will be around you having the opportunity to think about how to lessen the impact of some of these pitfalls, because most of them show up at some point in a co-op's life cycle. So the first one is around lack of clarity around how to include the principles and values in decision making. Fairly straightforward. Emerging conflicts between the principles of profitability and social objectives. So we could, just let our values slide a little bit, or our social impact slide a little bit, so that we make a bunch of money. And often that is a big decision that the board has to make. And if they don't make that decision carefully, it can definitely have some impacts on the members and the communities in which the co-op operates. Insufficient discussion of complex issues, not wanting to take the time to do the work to make the decision strong. Poorly defined policies, procedures, and group decision-making processes. Poorly defined roles poorly defined responsibilities, unbalanced power, lack of time devoted to caring for the board through self-evaluations, training, etc. And this is a key one that is often swept aside when there's more urgent work that needs to be done by a board, is to not tend to themselves, tend to being reflecting on how they're doing as a board collectively, or how each member is showing up, and for other directors to not be aware of the circumstances in which some board members might not be able to participate fully. Just that kind of awareness and constant evaluation of where the board's at and how they can continue to be better. Losing touch with members, we've talked about that a bit. Lack of transparency, definitely talked about that. And that is most clearly demonstrated by poor record keeping, poor reporting, poor like you don't take minutes of decisions, but then you also don't store them somewhere where you can access them when a member is requesting to see them, if it's within their member rights to see them. And it's always an opportunity to think of others. And so this last activity is around looking at some of these challenges, pitfalls, and thinking about how, as a director, you could best mitigate them or lessen their impact. And if you look at your worksheet, the language is right there, but imagine you're on the board of a co-op with one of the structures that's listed on your handout. Choose one pitfall or challenge that I've just gone through, or you can make up your own, and think about how you might work with your board to eliminate it or minimize it at least. And think about the same pitfall, but in the context of a different co-op structure. Because if you're in a worker co-op, you might have a very different approach to minimizing one of these challenges than if you're in a consumer co-op with 5,000 members, 20,000. Do you notice any differences between how you approach these challenges based on the type of co-op? So just pause the video for 10 or 15 minutes and take a moment to reflect upon that. And everything you need should be either in the handout or on the previous slide. So welcome back. And just the home stretch here, just leaving you with some kind of final ideas around how to approach good governance, kind of those North Stars of what to look for, aim for in effective governance of your co-op. The first one is that good governance complies with legal requirements and leading practices. So keeping in touch with leading governance practices, making sure you up your game around new developments in legislation or in your industry, and how to make best decisions within those changes. Good governance encourages and supports a plurality of perspectives and ideas. Good governance ends up with strong and informed decisions, and good governance clearly defines rules. And just to aim even higher, better governance explores innovative models of decision-making. So for those of you who are aware of consensus decision-making or consent decision-making, sociocratic governance, you can look and see if that is appropriate for the people involved in your co-op and the systems and structures you want to set up. Better governance provides for new ideas and approaches that build upon and also challenge established ideas. Better governance evaluates and monitors itself. And right back to the beginning of this class, better governance, best governance even, if I dare say, centers on values and the internationally codified values of co-ops, and also on the values that have been named by your co-op itself, and to ensure that all decision making centers on those values, makes you go towards having the best possible governance systems and structures your co-op can have. So that's it for today. Thank you so much on behalf of the British Columbia Co-op Association. I hope that your understanding or curiosity about co-op governance has increased over this last short class. And once again, big thanks to the Women's Economic Council for inviting the BC Co-op Association to be part of this great training series, Accelerating Inclusion. Thank you for your time.